Today, we break grounds, open old wounds, and finally bury the hatchet for one of the most infamous islands for this channel. Celestial Island is very interesting. I've been anticipating putting this video together, but also really dreading it, as Celestial Island is by far my least favorite island, and I know many people saw that coming. I really need to be convincing with my words on this one, since for some reason, people actually like this one? Like, are we listening to different islands, or am I just missing something? Whatever. Just like with Starhenge, we're doing a complete ranking of every monster, except this time we're going from worst to best, because the best is much more shocking than the worst this time around. The worst monster on Celestial is obviously Galvana. Like, come on, it wasn't even a contest. However, it's interesting because this one is the worst for very different reasons than the last one. While the adult Galvana was repetitive and annoying, this one takes the worst spot by being ear-piercingly shrill and tone-deaf. Not only that, it also has the disservice of playing in the verse. And if you're wondering what I mean by that, stick around until after the rankings and I'll explain further. Because trust me, this is not the last time you're going to hear me mention the verse. Beyond that, the design is ugly, the animations look like a fan-made one, the sound is ungodly loud and unpleasant. It all lines up perfectly to make an easy pick for the worst monster on the island, and one of the worst monsters in the entire game. I hate Galvana. At number 11, we have a monster that is such an absolutely abysmal failure that it devastates almost the entire community whenever it's mentioned. Remember Skaratar? Remember everything that made it special on Starhenge? Well, what if we took all of that away, shoved it into a single part of the opening, have it repeat the melody of another monster, and to add insult to injury, put it on some crappy sound font that in no way at all captures the awe-inspiring nature of the original? The only good thing about this monster is that it's not bad in the song, but when you only have a single 9-second track that loops for one part of the opening, that is really not saying much. I realize statistically it's not deserving of being number 11, as there are way worse tracks, practically, but this is Skaratar. You know, Skaratar. Number 10 is where things start to get spicy, since we're going all the way back to 2018 with this one, baby. Glacier is an abomination, and I hate this thing with a passion. The drum kit sounds absolutely nothing like the original one. The voice sounds nothing like its original counterpart, and its design is disgustingly far from the original idea behind its concept. Usually I like it when voices of monsters are really distinct from one another, but I do not like it when the reason why is because it sounds genuinely like something a fan of the game would make as a joke sound. Beyond that, it also gets the curse of the verse, which it itself is actually a main component of. So yeah, nothing has changed about my opinions over the years. Glacier is still abysmally awful, and every single aspect of this version of it I have no sense of empathy for. So you know how on Starhenge, Skaratar had a lone opener that people loved because it was a perfect amount of ambience that led to the epic power of Starhenge? Well, Ludvig tries to do that on this island, but fails miserably. Ludvig has a couple of decent attributes, mainly its design. It's really charming and lends well to the animation. Everything else about this is awful in so many ways. One of the co-creators of YSM, TheCybopGuy, you may know him as Ryan, uses a free-to-download program to compose his music, and when Ludvig came out, he instantly was able to recognize that it was a sound directly from that. Originally, we thought it was a version of that instrument with the delay and reverb cranked all the way to the max for some ungodly reason, but turns out we were wrong because the reality is way, way worse. There is a glitch in that software that causes the reverb to double, and the only way to fix it is to reset the software after composing the sound. This is why Ludvig is so awfully echoey and stuff. They were so lazy with the composition that something as simple as relaunching the program never even crossed their mind. I think that is all I need to say. How would anyone possibly defend this monster after knowing that? Next up, at number 8, we have Vamp, and boy oh boy, the hits just keep on coming. Vamp is nothing special, really. And if you compare it to Starhench's version of the same monster, it just gets worse and worse. I like a couple things, namely the animation and especially the rotating pipes on the head. The track itself is nothing special, however, and like Galvana before it, this thing plays in the verse. I bet you're really wondering what could be so bad about that verse. Well, it needs a whole section to explain, so give it time. Vamp overall is just really disappointing, and the most amazing part is that now that this island is done, it's also almost completely inaudible. So that's fun. Barely missing the halfway point, we have one of my least favorite monsters on the island, Atmos. First off, elephant in the room, this voice is awful! This voice sounds genuinely fan-made yet again, and the crappy guitar sound font is really not helping. It plays such a boring rhythm, it's unfunny, and its entire track on this island is literally just on the guitar part of its track on Starhenge. Think about that. The design is also really, really ugly, to the point where I'd honestly call it a failure of a design, and I don't throw that term around loosely. It plays twice, and each time it does, all it adds is really loud noise that is completely tonally different from what the song is trying to be, messing up my perception of the verse's tone. And just... why did they do Atmos so dirty? You know, you'd think after the halfway point of the video we'd start getting into just okay stuff, but nope, we have yet another awful track on this in the form of Flickie. I really wish this thing was more than it turned out to be, as it is my birth celestial. Its voice at least somewhat sounds like its old form, so that's something, I guess. Too bad it completely forgot how to use the singing voice that it had previously, since the track itself is absolutely nothing like the one on Starhenge, and is also just a carbon copy of Ludvig's track, but without the painful delay and reverb. Its design is decent at best, but the animation is almost unfinished. The way it carries momentum and flies all over the place really makes it look like a fan-made animation, which is an insult to fan animations since I've seen fan animations that look far better than this. Overall, it's not really the worst monster, but it is still really bad. Number 5 is Sopite, and I finally have some actual positive things to say, for crying out loud. The design is a bit funny, and the animation is alright. The sound is very basic, but at least it's not boring. I like how it pauses at the end of one of its tracks. That's pretty neat, I guess. Overall, it does a serviceable job of being a percussion monster, even though it plays the entire song and barely feels like it plays once. The main issue is the fact that the sound is absolutely nothing like the original, and in fact clashes with the original idea. Since on Starhenge, it had a synthetic drum pad vibe, and on this one it's trying to be an acoustic drum kit, which, why would you ever need? You have Tor. This island really fails to use any of its monsters creatively, and Sopite is a perfect example of that concept. I mean, we just mentioned it, but at number 4 we have Tort, who is generic and lifeless. The biggest positive about this monster is the hi-hat idea. That is super sick. The shell popping up is really clever, and I'm not above giving credit where it's due. If only this thing actually impacted the song at all so Sopite could do something else, then we'd actually have a good monster to talk about here. Tort's rhythm on Starhenge was one of my favorite rhythms in the game. I loved it so much that it was one of the first rhythms I mastered playing. So to see it degraded to this is just sad. And even though it makes me sound like a broken record, this design is just awful. There is so much wrong with the way it looks, and it is really ugly to look at. It is an ugly creature. Number 3 is Hornicle, who is still a huge far cry from its elder form. I like what it does in the opening, even though it literally does the same thing like 5 times in a row. The big hit that sends it back is also pretty nice, I guess. For me, the biggest fault of this thing is the colors beyond anything else. They look really, really awful, especially when you look at all the deep blues and reds of the adult form. That aside, it's alright, I guess. I don't know, it just doesn't really do anything fun or interesting. It's mostly just kind of there. Woohoo! Number 2 time, and we got Blum. Yeah, it just does what Scartar does, but it really fits on this instrument, so we take what we can get. It's really awful when you compare it to literally one of the best tracks in MSM history, but that's an unfair comparison. I don't even really have anything to say about this monster because this is like the most mid-tier sound on the island. If this was on any other island in the game, it'd be one of the monsters I just wouldn't talk about in the full video. But because of the structure of the countdown, I gotta say something. I guess I can say that Blum on this island is in fact a monster on this island, and it definitely plays a sound alright. That's really about it. So you're probably wondering by now what the heck I'm doing here. You've been paying attention, and you obviously know the only monster left. And yes, we really did it. Number 1 is actually, really, I am not joking, Feros. Now, this thing ain't getting here because of the design, because this thing is still disgustingly ugly, which is saying a lot because the original design was also really ugly, but that's not the point. This is the number 1 slot, so it has to be good in some way. That way is through the track of the monster, which is actually shockingly really interesting and complex. It is a really good sound and carries a sick rhythm with it, and I am honestly shocked something this good sounding is on such a bad island. I know people are going to disagree with me on this because, well, it's Feros at number 1, but be honest with yourself on this one. Can anything else really be considered even remotely good enough to be number 1? Yeah, I didn't think so. Just like Blum though, if this track was on any other island, it'd probably easily just end up being one of the ones we wouldn't even talk about it in the full video, so it still isn't anything special. It is just a very decent track that left me pleasantly surprised, which is the best this island can really get. So, Celestial Island is awful in so many ways, and looking over it this in-depth has only solidified my stance on it. Everything about it, from a musical standpoint to an artistic one to even an animation one, it's all just so awful and not up to the standards BBB should be setting. I've seen dozens of fan-made content that is more interesting and more expertly crafted than whatever the heck they were trying to do with this failure of a song. Also, this song has the verse, and I know you've been wondering what I mean by that. Well, the verse just so happens to be the single worst verse in the entire MSM franchise. From the span of Galvana starting to the time it ends, you get treated to a verse that is so bad, so heinously awful, so absolutely abysmal, that it single-handedly would have lowered this song to the bottom of the tier list. Nothing about this verse works in the slightest, from the crappy vocals to the crappy percussion that cuts out at awful times, to the almost complete lack of instruments, to the awful mixing issue that leaves things ear-piercingly loud or empty, to the lack of focus that destroys any sense of flow, to the complete disregard to the tone of the pacing of the previous verses, and beyond all that, to the utter failure of following up the theming of the song and destroying any consistency. 10 out of 12 of the monsters could have easily landed at number 1 worst spot on any other island, and at least 5 out of 12 of them could have even beaten Magpie on Cold for the worst spot. The gameplay on this island is so awfully designed that I am genuinely ashamed of BB for actually going through with doing it. It is both unintuitive and tedious, yet somehow still insanely easy. It just drags on, and your time versus reward is so heavily not in your favor. A Ludvig on this island is one of the most expensive and difficult things to get in the entire game, and yet a single Zinth on Wublin Island makes literally the exact same amount of currency. They literally carbon copied all of the coding from Wublin Island onto this one, and they didn't even try to hide it. I have no silver linings for you on this one. There is no good to end it on. There is no positive notes. This is the worst island in MSM. Mic drop. I'm out. That being said, we still have 2 songs left to go over, one of them being the newest island in the game, and the other being my favorite island. So I wonder which one you'd like to see me talk about more. If I had any say in things, I'd want to save Ethereal for the last traditional episode, as it just fits as an ending. But I'm down to clown with anything you guys give me. Anyway, that's it for me, and like always, I'll see you all in the next video. Alright, I saw a comment saying I should do this. Abed told me to do this when we were doing the podcast. We have a new tier, ladies and gentlemen. And the only island that will ever be in this tier is Celestial Island. Celestial Island is 100%. I'm dead serious this time. I am not playing around like I did with Wublin Cold and Water. This is the worst island in the entire franchise. There is no contest. I would rather listen to every song in D tier 10 times in a row than listen to Celestial Island once. It is so unbelievably below the bar set by every other island that it's laughable. Like, come on. This island's awful.